Welcome back to the FinsFocus podcast on a little bit of a more sour note, but we are here to review the Buffalo Bills game in Buffalo where the Dolphins lose by 28 points. That is a tough way to go out of this week 4. Still 3-1, but a really tough way to leave week 4. How are you doing, Tyler?
Obviously not great. That's a game that I very much expected to win. I know that all the games in the past that have come to this point, the Dolphins have lost. But this was a game that I wanted them to win, obviously, and expected them to win because it felt like they had finally arrived and this was time to make a statement. But it was anything but that. It was a total disaster. Obviously, in the moment, reactions were just not fun. It was not a great watch, especially the second half, because it just felt like there were so many opportunities to make the game at least somewhat enjoyable, and it just wasn't at all. We end up losing by 28, and yeah, a bit of a somber note.
Definitely a somber note. Just something that needs to be said. The Bills have our number until we prove otherwise. That's just something that we can't avoid. We're 1-8 since 2020. Since the team has had winning records the last 3 years, we are 1-8 against this one team. So they have really taken it to us. So that's just something that needs to be said. And it's just the facts. The Bills have our number. For myself, my instant reactions or my reactions while watching the game was just sad. I had texted some of my friends, and I had texted you actually, I think, maybe. But basically we were talking about how the team that gets the first stop, that's the team who's probably going to win the game. And then the Dolphins got behind the sticks with penalties, with stupid penalties, with pre-snap penalties, which for the most part were solved before this game. We get behind the sticks, we punt, and then you go from there. And ever since you don't score on that first drive, the game just kind of got away from you, because by halftime, this is again more large. We'll get into the nitty gritty stuff, but at halftime you go, it's 31-14, kind of out of nowhere. The end of the first half it went quickly and it went fast, and you look up at the scoreboard and all of a sudden it's 31-14. So definitely not the way you wanted to kind of go out in the first half, which really set yourself up for failure in the second half. But we'll get into the Dolphins offense first, then we'll get into the Dolphins defense, because there's a lot that needs to be said. So Tyler, where do you want to start off?
You said starting with the Dolphins offense. So I think we got to probably start off with the line. I think that was the biggest issue, and kind of just something that I didn't expect to be as poor as it was. You're going against a Bills team that doesn't have Von Miller, and just has not exactly mauled up front, especially against Dolphins teams of the past. Last year, it felt like their front didn't give us that many issues, but this time, without Connor Williams, as soon as that injury report came in at 11:30, and I saw that Connor Williams was going to be out, that was kind of the moment where it started to set in that this might potentially be a loss. And Liam Eichenberg playing center, it went about as well as I expected it to, but man, they were just getting absolutely mauled up front. I think the number one way that Miami had to throw off the Bills defense was with their discipline, was to be able to run the ball. And there was just absolutely nothing moving in that area. And Mike McDaniel came out later and said that he thought that he abandoned the run too early. To be honest, I don't think that was nearly as much of the issue. There just was no effectiveness running the ball, and Miami put themselves in a lot of bad spots with 1st and 10 runs that turned into 2nd and 10 or 2nd and 11, or it was a holding call and now it's 1st and 20. And it felt like after those two drives, the first two drives that Miami scored on, they just kept putting themselves behind the sticks. And they didn't trust Tua and the offensive line enough to do enough true drop back stuff when they were down. They tried to go to the pulling, the play action passing, and it just seemed that none of it worked. There were a lot of screens called, and it seemed like Buffalo blew all of them up. I honestly, my major takeaway, at least on the offensive play calling side of the ball, is there wasn't enough trust in Tua to push the ball down the field, in my opinion. I wanted to see more of Tua doing the empty sets, having to make reads. I know that it's a really tough pass defense, so giving them obvious pass looks is not the way to go. But there were so many attempts for misdirection and screens, especially on second down and 7, which is typically I feel like a ton, like down and distance where Miami typically will run normal pass concepts and get big chunk plays. It felt like they were just all out of whack. The entire game just seemed like it fell apart on offense after they didn't score on that third drive.
100%. So for me, I agree. I think, and I said this at halftime, but Mike McDaniel, at least to me, was overthinking with his play calls, with his key decisions, and it wasn't his best, and he got completely outcoached in this one. I thought the going for 2, which probably should have happened, like it made sense, but to me, that was just not completely necessary. That's not the worst one. There's a couple 4th and 3rd and 1s where you're passing instead of running up the middle. There were just a couple plays where he's trying to get too fancy. To me, it was just a lot of overthinking on his part. I think it came down to not trusting, like you said, Tua, and just the fundamentals of the offense, like not just keeping it a little bit more simple, which I wanted him to do, and he kind of got away from that. And yeah, like you said, we'll start with the O-line, they'll get into the run game because they kind of go hand in hand. Because of the difference in quality of depth behind them, Connor Williams has become easily the most important offensive lineman on the team, even though I'd argue he's the 3rd best offensive lineman we have, because Liam Eichenberg just isn't an NFL caliber player. Like I'm not saying anything crazy here or show-stopping or anything that no one knows, but it just needs to be said. He's just not NFL quality. So that's definitely played a role in what happened. Mostert has to be better too. The explosiveness wasn't there. The ball security was lackluster. Other than that one nice catch he had on the sideline, it was a pretty rough game from him. And you really want, especially going back to last year where Mostert had a bunch of great games against the Bills, and honestly was the reason we were in the playoff game with Skylar Thompson. And he had really showed like he can be a physical back, all this type of stuff. He really just wasn't there. He had 5 carries for 7 yards or whatever. He just wasn't there. He wasn't there, and you couldn't trust him. At least A-Chain does look like the future. He does look awesome. Like, I'm not going to lie. His speed and explosiveness in particular is insane, and no one can tackle him. Even this Bills defense that was tackling very well in this game, they couldn't tackle him. So he looks like the future. But yeah, Mostert didn't have the trust, didn't have the explosiveness. So it was tough from that standpoint. Something else I want to say is that Tua was fine. You could even argue he was good, and I'm not saying good, but I'm saying good in comparison to great or elite. I think he was fine. That's what I would say. But in games against teams like the Bills, and in games where your defense doesn't show up, the game script isn't in your favor, and for after the first 2-3 drives, you're playing behind the sticks, you can't be fine. You need to be great and elite, and he just wasn't that. He threw a bad interception, and he had some key misses on key downs. Jalen Waddle was wide open a couple of times on 3rd down. So it was just a rough game from Tua. He was fine. He wasn't great or elite. I'm not going to bash him too much because he wasn't the reason we lost the game, but he definitely wasn't the reason we went out there and won it.
Yeah, with Tua, like you said, I think fine is the perfect indicator. He wasn't great. It wasn't bad. It just felt like there were multiple times during this game where Miami uses a lot of their pre-snap motion to dictate whether it's man or zone, and then they have Tua throw to a side of the field based on what you get. Sometimes they'll do the slant wheel for zone, and that 2 verticals with the underneath drag route for man. And Tua would immediately, based on the pre-snap indicator, go to the right side, but he would cock back to throw. And the problem was, if it wasn't there, he's trying to get rid of the ball so quickly that now he has to, because his arm's already cocked back, do a full-on reset, and that just allowed the defensive line to get into his lap that much easier. I know the offensive line was bad. They're the number one catalyst for our offense not being as good as it should be in this kind of game. It was the offensive line primarily. Basically, the Bills did a really good job on their back end of making things difficult for Tua, but there were times where stuff was open, and I just wanted him to not second-guess it and take it. There was one out-breaking route towards the far side of the field where Tua ended up throwing it late to Tyreek, and he tried to sneak his feet in bounds, and he didn't quite get there. And you saw Tua, because of the pressure, double clutch it a little bit. There were 2 or 3 hitches on his drop, and I would just like to see him come out of that and just throw it like we've seen it in the first 3 games. You could tell he was more hesitant because the Bills were getting a ton of pressure, and also were doing a really good job holding up on the back end. It was a really fine, okay game for Tua. There were a couple instances like that. I just wish I could see more of the stuff, like the great stuff that you were talking about. Like through 3 weeks, we've seen so many awesome plays from Tua. I just wish that against this Bills defense, we saw more of it. But obviously, I think the number 1 and 2 problems, Tua's not in the top, 5 list of issues. He played fine. Just wish you could see, him step up and put the team on his back when the other stuff isn't working. But he really wasn't put in a position to do that.
Yeah, it was an uncharacteristically kind of poor performance from Tua, specific to the decisions he was making. Again, there was just a couple times where he was reading one side of the field, and then you have Waddle on the ISO side where it's like 3-by-1 and he's the one by himself where he's open, but Tua doesn't even look at him. And it was just really frustrating when you're like, I'm not even watching film yet. Like this was before film. Like my friend, I was at a buddy's house and he had caught it out like while watching the game. Like Waddle just ran kind of a dig. It was like a square in, and he just found himself wide open. And I believe it was on a key third down. And yeah, he just missed him. Tua's stat line could have also looked better. I mean, Waddle had a touchdown, but Eichenberg strolled his ass 15 yards down the field. So that was kind of funny, but it wasn't actually 15 yards, but it was just like, what are you doing going down the field? Like way too far, but it is what it is. Yeah, this isn't a game where it's like, let's spend all the time on Tua. I feel like there's a lot of other things to talk about. Offensively, I think the only other thing I had to say was just, this goes for up front, this goes for everyone. We were just struggling to match the physicality in general. I'm not going to lie, the only other thing I had other than that was just Ingold and Smythe continue to show why they got paid first and out of all the role guys. And also that, for me, get Robbie Chosen off the team. I think that him rotating in for River Craycraft is a huge downgrade, which people don't seem to get. Yeah, Chosen's fast, but to me, it's a huge downgrade specific for this offense. I don't know if you have anything else for the offense, though.
I do think that this team really does lack a bona fide third option outside of Tyreek and Waddle without River Craycraft. Just somebody, not necessarily a third passing option, because that is Braxton Berrios, and honestly, he's been really good through the first couple weeks. But I want to see another guy who has the blocking expertise that River Craycraft does, because, man, there were so many times through the first 3 weeks where Craycraft came in with clutch blocks on those outside tosses that Miami could not execute this game. I really do wonder if Miami's going to start scouring the receiver market, maybe throw a little late pick at some team just to go get like a big slot kind of receiver to have down this stretch, just because they have so many other archetypes. And obviously, Robbie Chosen isn't somebody I foresee being in like the long-term plans of this Miami team. So I wonder if there's somebody that they're looking at as a potential like trade option, if there's somebody who's cheap, maybe a free agent. I would love to see just another big slot receiver added to this lineup, just because I think they need somebody who can kind of block on their perimeter, and River Craycraft was largely that guy. But yeah, like you said, there isn't much to talk about on the offense. Obviously, Tua, like I said, did not have a bad game by any means. Like I said, I wanted him to, of course you want him to put the team on his back, but when you watch the tape, you see there just aren't opportunities to do that. He wasn't anywhere close to the main issue. He did not play bad, but yeah, I think it's probably time that we move on to the major disappointment of the day, which is the defense.
The defense, yeah. And I'll tell you what, Robbie Chosen might not be a part of our long-term plans. I hope he's not part of the short-term plans. Anyways, let's go to the defense. Speaking of struggling to match physicality, all that stuff, the first thing to say before we get into the nitty-gritty and players and all that stuff, tackling in general, bad. Just a bad tackling day from everyone. We'll get into some specific players for sure. Don't get it twisted. But yeah, tackling in general just wasn't bad. And the other thing I was going to say was just Fangio's defense. I think this is a talking point to go in here too before we get into the specific players, because going into the season after watching the tape and of his defenses in Denver and in Chicago, you understand and you're ready for the fact that this is a defense where unless you have a stud nose tackle and a defense filled with talent who also understands it to a T, which takes time, more than one season, that this defense will struggle against the run. But you go in knowing that, and you go in knowing that, and thinking that the defense will be designed to make life on the quarterbacks really tough unless they can run the ball and play off of that. So it's a defense that can still be elite, just that's just not what's happened thus far. And the Chargers put 30 plus on you, and the Bills just took your lunch money on Sunday. And it happened because the run defense has been poor outside of Foxborough. And once that happened, it allowed, like what we saw on Sunday, Josh Allen to completely decimate this defense. Now, it should be said, we are 4 games into the first season with Fangio and personnel that doesn't exactly fit what he wants to do and how he wants to play. So it's early, and that's something to keep in mind too. But early on, it has struggled to keep up with the big-armed QBs that we have in the AFC.
Yeah, I think the main thing is the run game. I know that these defensive linemen, I've said it the entire offseason, none of these interior defensive linemen are really fits. But man, I didn't expect it to be this bad through a month of the season, and it's still just not good. The amount of push that the Bills were able to get on like simple double teams. The only player who looked semi-capable of like stacking up against the double team and at least holding some ground is Zach Sealer. But in that case, they would just run at Christian Wilkins or Deshaun Hand or Raekwon Davis and cause a linebacker to have to play 2 gaps. And then whenever the linebacker would play one of the gaps, it would be the wrong one. And, Latavius Murray or James Cook are breaking off a 10-plus yard gain. The interior defensive line is something that it's not going to just change itself over time unless Vic Fangio goes just a entire revamped scheme, which he's not going to do. This is somebody who very much sticks to his principles. Unless he changed the way that he designs that defense up front, they need a major personnel move, and that's something that I didn't think I'd be saying a month into the season, but man, that interior defensive line is rough. The linebackers, David Long had a good day against the run. Like, he made a couple nice tackles, but like I said, the defensive line is putting him in positions where he can't possibly be right. Jerome Baker had a couple decent plays against the pass, but the problem is the Bills are just running pass concepts at David Long and running at Jerome Baker, and that's what all the teams have done this entire year. And that's why I think we saw an Andrew Van Ginkel get moved into Baker's spot, because they think that Van Ginkel at least has more speed and pass coverage chops. There are just the amount of ways that you can attack this Dolphins defense right now. It's putting way too much strain on linebackers who just don't have enough range to do what they're being asked to do, because they're being asked to attack the run and fill against the run and then pretty much run the pipe and go defend everything that comes over the middle. And there's just too much responsibility on them right now. And then on top of that, Fangio has them coming on a lot more blitzes because of the fact that the front 4 isn't getting home. He's having guys like Long, like Baker, come on these blitzes, but the problem is a lot of them are coming out of those too high shells where they're not showing blitz. So a lot of these linebackers are coming in from depth and are having to run from 5-10 yards, past the line of scrimmage to go get in on these blitzes. And then by the time they're at the quarterback, Josh Allen's already figured out where to throw it opposite the blitz. I don't really know what the step is, but this offense is just getting decimated by good quarterback play. We saw Justin Herbert had a really good game in week 1, and the run game for the Chargers did. And now you play another great to elite quarterback, and they just have answers against whatever Miami's doing. If it's manned up one-on-one, they attacked Kader Kohu, who should have been removed from Stephon Diggs way earlier in this game. If it's a run play, they're going to go get a bunch of yards because Miami just doesn't have the defensive line talent to make plays in the run game, and their linebackers are consistently wrong. And then the amount of ways that Miami is just getting abused on stacks and bunch formations. Justin Bethel was the nickel apex defender on a lot of those plays, and he was out of position so many times. This team is going to get a lot better, I think, on defense when Jalen Ramsey comes back. But the problem is there's just nothing in the front 7 that you can really build on right now.
Yeah, speaking of the front 7, I think Wilkins, he just doesn't seem to be a fit, and he's certainly not 2 times better than Sealer in terms of getting $10 million for him. So it's not like, I don't think he's worth $20 million, at least right now, especially in this defense. So the chances of him being on this team or not being on this team are getting higher and higher as the season progresses, considering the money he wants, which is tough for me as a fan. But when you watch the tape and when you watch the games, it's just how it goes. But that's something that I think we can give that conversation some time just to see if they can turn it around. Obviously, we're not too optimistic, but we'll see. That's something we have to give time. Again, 4 games in. But yeah, the Bills kind of showed why and where this defense is at so early. I think You mentioned it. Deshaun Elliott was sorely missed. Xavier Howard, I wanted him to be put on Diggs, and the tackle in general was bad. And these are all things that I said at halftime, and there were zero adjustments. Kader Kohou continued to be one-on-one in space with no help against Stephon Diggs. There wasn't a scheme change or a change in sort of the stylistic way of how he wants to play defense and attack Josh Allen. A lot of fans have talked about how Josh Boyer had more success against Josh Allen last year, and he did, to be quite honest. And not that he should have just threw everything out the window and just started blitzing everything, but it was just the fact that you saw what happened in the first half where the Bills put up 31 points, which was, I think, tied their franchise high, something like that. It was some sort of record. But they had put up 31 points in that first half, and there were zero adjustments on the defensive side of the ball. It's not like you started putting more pressure on it. It's not like you did anything else. But there are just a bunch of things that happened why the game got to where it got to, and it's like, you're so right. Wilkins is not fit the defense. Sealer had a good game, but it's the defensive line does not put the linebackers in position for success. Jerome Baker is a guy who's athletic, but he doesn't have the range that you need in a Fangio defense. David Long Jr., honestly, isn't really a scheme fit in terms of what Fangio usually likes to do with his linebackers, but at least he can stop the run, which is what you want. But again, it doesn't matter when your defensive line is playing like that. So that's something where the front seven is just a work in progress. You also don't have Jalen Phillips, who I'm not going to say he changes the game or anything, but it could change the way you play defense, and missing out on him was tough. Again, not the reason that we lost or anything, but that's a guy who could change some things, even though he is a guy who has largely had a lot of, hasn't had a lot of success against the Bills in the past. So just something to put out there. Now going to the secondary, again, Kader Kohou should have been taken off of Stephon Diggs way earlier. I mean, Stephon Diggs, he got dog walked by him, and that's something that's going to happen is Stephon Diggs. But it happened because while Kader is good, he's not at the level to be one-on-one with Stephon Diggs, especially in space with no or limited help over the top. He was put in a horrible position, and because of that, struggled to keep up. So that was just a decision that was mind-boggling. People have said Xavier Howard has lost a step, that, he's getting older and up there. I'm not going to lie, it would be tough for him to do worse than what Kader did. So to me, it was kind of wild that he wasn't put on him after.
Yeah, just a note on Xavier Howard. I thought, honestly, across from Kader Kohou, had a really strong game when I watched it back on tape. Almost every snap I saw, he had blanket coverage on whoever he was playing as the number two, whether it was Gabe Davis or Trent Sherfield or whoever else. It felt like Xavier Howard, he looks like the old Xavier Howard again, at least against those Bills receivers. And I know outside of Diggs, they aren't anything special, but that is one positive note, is Xavier Howard does look good. And you got to put the best corner on the best receiver. And I understand that, maybe you think Kader Kohou is your best option, but when you've gotten to halftime and Stephon Diggs already has 2 touchdowns and is torching, it just doesn't make sense to not switch it up or at least try something. I mean, I don't know what the idea was behind keeping him on him the entire game. I think it was just a little stubborn from Fangio, in my opinion. And here's my thing with this defense as a whole. I just thought I would touch on this. This team right now is built. A Fangio defense is built to, you're going to give up the run, but eventually offensive coordinators are going to get antsy, and they're going to push the ball down the field, and it's up to you to make sure that when they push the ball down the field, your disguises and zone coverage forces quarterbacks into making critical mistakes and getting turnovers. But the problem is, the Dolphins aren't just not stopping the run, they're giving up in very, very large gains in the run, so teams are not scared enough to go away from it. They don't have the linebackers and nickel players right now who are able to drop into coverage and disguise well enough, because their linebackers are being drawn up by play action and they don't have the range to necessarily run the pipe or go bail back in coverage. And then the DBs on the backside, because of the fact that you're blitzing so much and you're not getting pressure, are forced to play man, or when they play zone are getting beat underneath. There just is no way for a quarterback to play antsy right now, especially a good one, as good as Josh Allen. He has no reason to force the ball down the field, because the way that you're playing defense right now, he knows that you're eventually going to blitz, and then he's just going to throw opposite the blitz and go get 20 yards. There is no counter punch from Miami right now to try to force those turnovers, and that's what scares me so much with this Fangio defense. I expect it to get a little bit better when Jalen Ramsey comes back, but even then, we're looking at least a month, and there's just so many problems in the front seven that I get scared that teams are never going to test us down the field, and we're just going to be death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was saying at the beginning when I was just talking about Fangio's defense as a whole, like you kind of just touched on. All of this stuff that's happening in the passing game starts with the run game. It starts with the run defense. Because James Cook is running all over you, Latavius Murray is running all over you, getting chunk gains. Even if it's not 10 to 15 yards, they're getting 6 to 7 yards and falling forward every play, which is on the front seven. That's allowing Josh Allen to have a crazy game in the passing game. Again, Kader Kohou's put in a bad spot, of course. He struggled to stay on Stephon Diggs. But it's because the run game is allowing other teams to set up the pass game that in this Fangio defense where you're like, okay, we're going to give up the run. That's going to happen. Like that's almost something that's expected at this point. The issue is the second part isn't coming. The second part where the quarterback is forced to make tough reads against the shell that doesn't change, post-snap, all this stuff. That's not happening because they're picking reads pre-snap that they can tell, and then they're going to that guy. Stephon Diggs, of course, one of the best route runners in the NFL, killed Kader Kohou, but it was just one of those things where it's like that second part of Fangio's defense, which is the largest part, that back end where you're forcing quarterbacks to think a lot, that's just not happening. Quarterbacks aren't thinking, they're letting it rip, they're playing off the run, and because they're playing off the run, they're gashing us through the air, which is something that you don't usually see against the Fangio defense. I'm so and ready to give up the run. It's just crazy that the passing defense has been where it has been, considering the players I feel like we have in the secondary.
Yeah, and Fangio's counter to the fact that he's been giving up all these little chunks and the run game has not been great is he's blitzing more and playing more man coverage, but he's disguising it. But the problem is these teams now know that that's coming when the run game isn't working. So the amount of times that I've seen Josh Allen, I saw it from Mac Jones, seen it from every quarterback we've played, the amount of times where they hard count and they fake the snap to see who's coming because all of Fangio's blitzes are coming from depth. They just either hard count or fake the snap, and then immediately they know exactly who's blitzing, and then before the snap they can dictate who they're going to throw to off the blitz, who's their hot, who are they going to try to get the ball to underneath. And because of the fact that, like I said earlier, all of these blitzes are typically coming from a deeper depth because Fangio doesn't want to give away what he's doing, give more time, especially like Josh Allen, who can move a little bit, to step out to his right and just find the guy. And I just don't know what the next wrinkle is in this defense. It almost seems like Miami's best bet is against a lot of these teams, when they get Jalen Ramsey back at least, to almost just fully endorse the full-on man coverage looks. But the problem is they have a defensive coordinator who is not, that's not what his primary skill set is.
No, he likes his own match, yeah.
Exactly. So I'm very interested to see what he thinks the next wrinkle is, but just there's so much going on that defense that I'm really concerned, especially in the front seven, that it's just going to continue to be all these small little chunk gains for really good teams, and then the best quarterbacks are going to be able to play clean and take advantage of it.
No, for sure. And the one other thing that I wanted to point out, Deshaun Elliott was a huge loss, and we talked about it on Friday's show, but Deshaun Elliott was playing like one of the most underrated players in the league, and Brandon Jones came in to replace him due to injury, obviously, and had his worst game as a professional. Just brutal tackles, bad angles, completely missed coverages. You could really tell he hadn't had the time in camp like everyone else did when they were healthy and learning the new system. He never got the time, and it shows because the tackling was horrible. And that's something that Brandon Jones is usually good at. That was his actual kind of thing coming out of college, is his ability to blitz and his ability to come down against the run. But he really struggled in space. He really struggled to play this Fangio-style defense where you're playing more as a hybrid linebacker that has to be able to cover and tackle. So while he's a guy who usually does tackle, he didn't even do that in this game, but then definitely struggled in coverage. And it's just like when Kader Kohou and Brandon Jones converged on the launch Stephon Diggs touchdown, Stephon Diggs is not a yak guy. He's not. He's a route runner. He gets the ball. He goes down. The fact that you allowed that to happen and you didn't make a tackle there and he ran after the catch for the touchdown was completely ridiculous. That was something that just can't happen on defense.
Yeah, I don't even know if there's that much else to say. It just feels like this defense is... They were a disaster on Sunday. I think we all know that. And Vic Fangio obviously is a really good defensive coordinator, but this team embodies why so many teams don't run Fangio stuff. And it's because you get beat by the run, you get beat by these little passes, and then eventually when you're forced to adjust, then you get beat with the big play. And it's just this whole defense is designed to take away the big play, but the problem is they're just creating so many of them because they can't get these little stops. And I don't know what I don't know what the answer is. And as much as I would love to, it's going to come down to the guy who's innovated and created this scheme to come down to it. And there's no guy to trust more than Vic Fangio, but man, it just doesn't look good on defense.
Yeah, and before we get to our last segment, which is a new segment, which we're very excited to start, there was something that I did want to touch on just to go back to kind of the whole game in general. One of the things that played a part in the McDaniel overthinking was, and this is just something I want to get your opinion on, to be honest, is like, you're down 31-14, and at the end of the half, instead of going to score and being aggressive and being the impressive young mind that McDaniel is, he kind of chose to go to the half, which I understand in terms of you don't and you can't allow the Bills to get more points before halftime, especially getting the ball back. But how do you decide to do that when you're down 17 points? Because you are in the position where you need points. You need points more than you need to stop them getting points at that point in time in the game. Let me say point one more time. Take a shot every time I say point. But the fact that he decided to basically just kind of commit to just going to the half down 17, to be honest, that was a decision that I just can't be on board with.
Yeah, there were just some times where it looked like McDaniel was coaching to not get blown out. And when you're already down 17, that's a blowout. And I know that you're playing for the second half and you're like, hey, we can make adjustments. But you have to at some point go for the points because just the way your defense is playing, they're not going to go from a 31-point half to a shutout half. You have to find a way to get those points on the board. And I want to see more aggressive stuff from McDaniel. Like I said, the traditional drop back passing attack just wasn't there. There was too much pulling stuff. I mean, as much as Liam Eichenberg was not good at all, there were a lot of times where McDaniel was putting him in pretty poor positions on passing downs because he would pull Robert Hunt across the formation and have these long, drawn-out play-action passes. But the problem is then you have Liam Eichenberg trying to reach out and block somebody who's like a gap over. And I felt like there were a lot of times where maybe you want to go a little bit more vanilla here and just go try to get your stuff back. And then work back to your other, like your more vanilla, work from your more vanilla to your more advanced offense. I feel like this was a poorly coached game, and McDaniel did look like he got completely outclassed, and so did Fangio, of course. It was just a really, really rough game on all fronts. And another thing that I'm really interested to see how McDaniel kind of counters is it looked like Buffalo figured out a lot of the landmarks for when snaps were coming with Miami's motion, which caused them to blitz oftentimes off the edge where Miami has the motion going to, and it left Tua in a lot of pressure situations. There was a time where I think it was either the first or second, I want to say it was the first touchdown drive, where Tre'Davious White, I looked back on the All-22, he timed up the snap pretty well, but they said that he jumped just a little early, and you could tell that he was watching A-Chain on this motion and knew exactly when he got to that landmark, that's when he's going to jump and he was going to have a free rush. I wonder if teams are going to start like nickel blitzing Miami more and sending somebody to try to speed up to his process, make him second guess things. And the more that they know like the timing and the more that they see this play on tape, they're going to figure out the landmarks. So I wonder what McDaniel's counter is going to be in order to stop guys getting to their landmark, like knowing what the landmark is and then just blitzing or having immediate pressure.
Oh, 100%. And one thing, speaking of the offense, might as well bring it up now that we're back onto it. Joe Marino, he works with like Locked On. He's like the Locked On Bills guy. He talked about, and take this with a grain of salt because all these data points, it's tough to know what actually is the first read. But basically, they had Tua throwing to his first read 80% of the time, weeks 1 to 4. And in week 4 against the Bills, Tua went to his first read on 57% of throws, which is a great job by McDermott and his defense. But to me, it was just that combined with the fact that the Bills had just 4 rushers and they got pressure made it that much harder for Tua to get the ball out in terms of like, yeah, they made him get to his second progression, but that was more of a thing into his first 2-3 years where you're like, okay, he's really struggling after you kind of take away his first read. But this year, which was one of the major developments of Tua and why we were thinking he's taking that next step and why I think he still has taken that next step was even when they did take away his first progression, he was still getting to his second progression with time and kind of moving around the pocket to give him the ability to make those throws. The issue was the Bills were rushing 4, dropping back 7, and they were still getting pressure against 5 and 6 man protections, which you put Tua in an impossible situation there. So the fact that we had 6 man protection sometimes and they were getting home with just 4 is tough because, yeah, you can say McDermott is doing well in terms of, like you said, setting blitzes with corners and then dropping back defensive linemen and for the most part linebackers. It's like, yeah, that's cool, but you got to expect that in the NFL. This isn't like a lower class league. Like you have to expect all of this type of stuff from defenses, and the fact that people are getting home with 4-man rushes and taking away your first read. If that's the way to stop this offense, that just can't be the case going forward.
Yeah, you nailed it right on the head there. I think that you at some point there's a breaking point when you're a team that primarily reads space. I think first read, second read, a lot of that isn't necessarily
it's rhythm and flow true. And timing.
And it's so much rhythm and timing and getting the ball out fast, not necessarily to one read, but reading space that might have 3 or 4 guys in it and picking one. But here's my thing. If you have Tua who has to read one side of the field and then get to the opposite side of the field, no matter how many reads you count that as, you have to give him enough time to get to the opposite side of the field, and Miami just simply was not doing that. Like you said, Buffalo did not have to blitz, and they were getting not just pressure, because Tua does well against edge pressure. It was interior pressure so often, and that honestly, comes down to the fact that we didn't have Connor Williams and Liam Eichenberg was playing, but you can't have that consistently happening against some of these good teams because, man, they're going to make you pay for it. And a team like the Bills, where you outlined in our preview that they have a lot of solid interior defensive linemen who are finesse pass rush guys, they're going to beat you up front, especially when you have a guy like Liam Eichenberg who just had a terrible day.
A horrible day. So McDaniel had come out today and said, I'm happy with that for his first start at a new position. Dude, that's cool. It's coach speak. He has to say it. I think, and this is kind of getting off topic, but the fact that Liam Eichenberg, who was a guard who had never played center, is the backup to a guard who's already kind of transitioned from center and Connor Williams, like the fact that you don't have a legitimate center on the roster other than Alama Uluwave, who's on the practice squad. We have 2 guards who have moved to center. Just kind of ridiculous. You sign Dan Feeney, you trade him away in training camp. Just something that needs to change. Like that's a position that, like you said, Liam Eichenberg was getting torched by Ed Oliver and company. So that really affected Tua and the way this offense ran. There's so many reasons why we lost this game. There's so many different things that goes into it. I feel like a lot of people try to specifically blame Tua or the defense, and they want to choose if you're a Tua hater, if you're a Tua lover, all this type of stuff. No, McDaniel got out coached. The defense played bad, the tackling was bad, and Tua was fine and not great. I think it boils down to the fact that it all coincides with each other, which makes it to the point where you lost by 28 points. Because guess what? If it was only the defense's fault, the offense would have done a little bit better and it would have been a closer game. If it was just McDaniel's fault, the defense would have stepped up and it would have been a closer game. If Tua came out and tried to put this team on his back but just couldn't get it done, it would be a closer game. The reason we lost by 28 points to a Von Miller-less Bills is because everything went together. I feel like Dolphins fans are so quick to blame specific people. No. The defense played bad. McDaniel got a coach and Tua was fine. That's what happened.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's time that we move on to our awards, which we now have. We now have 5 awards. We're going to name them quickly, I think one by one, and then we're both going to attempt to guess what the other person put for that specific award. So if you want to start us off and name our first award here, I will, and you want to guess my guy, I'll try to guess yours.
All right, so we'll start with the Isaiah McKenzie Award, which is for the opposing team's kind of best role player on the other team. Of course, that's why we call it the Isaiah McKenzie Award. He's gone off for the Bills against us so many times. So while Stephon Diggs was probably their best player, that's kind of too obvious to pick week to week. You kind of know the elite players are going to play well. When you go like against a team like the Cowboys, which you will later in the year, it's too easy to pick a guy like Micah Parsons who's going to go off. So we have the Isaiah McKenzie Award. And for the role player that I think went off for them, that I'm going to say that Tyler chose, it has to be their defense because they stonewalled our offense. I'm going to assume he went with Teron Johnson, but I don't know if he counts as a role player. But that's what I'm going to guess he went with.
I didn't go with a defensive player. I actually did go with a Bills offensive player. I went with James Cook because I felt like there were just so many plays where, I probably could have picked any of the Bills' interior offensive linemen too, but I felt that James Cook kind of embodied that running game. Obviously, there were some Latavius Murray plays, but James Cook, it felt like was just getting 6 to 7 yards every play. And as good of a running back as he is, I didn't feel that this was somebody who necessarily should have tore this team apart. So that's who I went with. As for you, I'm gonna say that you picked a player who had like a couple nice plays in the pass game. I'm gonna say that you went with like a Deontay Hardy.
Okay, I was actually so close to picking him. On a real note, I was also close to picking Leonard Floyd just because he actually had a very good game, kind of on the edge. But I decided to go a little bit outside the box, and I went with Taylor Rapp just because they played that kind of too high safeties, and without Jordan Poyer, they still limited us. I don't know if that was a fact of, our offense just not being able to do it, but he was a big part of that, aside from Micah Hyde. Micah Hyde was awesome, had the interception on a terrible decision from Tua, by the way. That was a horrible decision, especially going at Robbie Chosen, who ran a bad route too, but bad decision from Tua, bad ball. That's all on Tua. Micah Hyde had a great game, but aside from him replacing Jordan Poyer, who was hurt, I thought Taylor Rapp played awesome from that safety position.
Yeah, and moving on here, up next, we've got the MVP award. Now, this one is a little, obviously we know what the MVP is, most valuable player, but it kind of is usually going to go to the winning team. It's going to be Dolphins most of the time, assuming the Dolphins win games. But today, I'm assuming both of us have Bills. I'm going to try to guess yours first. I'm going to guess that you went with Stephon Diggs. I don't feel like there's really another option.
Yeah, I did go with Stephon Diggs. He is one of my favorite players in the league. It sucks that he's on the Bills. We've been over this, and I kind of touched on it on Friday's show, being like, you have to stop this guy if you're going to win. We didn't stop him. So, yeah, he was easily my MVP of the game. If we had to give a Dolphins MVP, I just want to shout out Alec Ingold just because he had a great game at the fullback position. He ate up Matt Milano on a block where he got almost to Tua as he was dropping back. Like, it was one of those ones where it wasn't even a run play, but if it was a run play, he probably would have got to Tua before he even handed the ball off, and Alec Ingold kind of blocked him there. So shout out to Alec Ingold. But for you, like, it feels bad, but I feel like I just want to take Stephon Diggs as well. If it's not him, I'm going to guess you picked Matt Milano.
It was Stephon Diggs. All the reasons that you said, he was the best player on the field. I debated going Josh Allen because Josh Allen had a sick game, but I felt like the way that Diggs just tore our defense apart, that's who I went with. Up next, we've got the Unsung Hero Award. Again, another award that we wish could go to a Dolphin. Mine, in fact, is O'Bill. It's somebody kind of just under the radar who had a really good game and was pivotal in either team winning. Of course, this time it was the Bills. I'm going to take a stab at yours. I'm going to say that you went with, this isn't necessarily an unsung guy, but I'm going to say that you went with Ed Oliver just because he had so much pressure from the interior.
Okay, so I was going to go with Ed Oliver, but I mentioned him earlier. I went with Leonard Floyd. Again, I just thought he had a good game on the edge, getting pressure. I know they got pressure up the middle too, which I was kind of deciding between Ed Oliver and Leonard Floyd, but like I said before, and I probably shouldn't say that next time if I'm going to pick him for an award, so that was tough. But yeah, I thought Leonard Floyd had a good game off their edge when they're already missing Von Miller. The fact that this was a game where they got pressure so easily without him is kind of worrisome going forward, but as for you, again, assuming it's a Bills player for the unsung hero, I'm going to guess Osiris Torrance, but I'm not sure.
Okay, you mentioned him earlier for one of my awards. You guessed him. I went with Teron Johnson because I felt like he didn't make any specific play that anyone shouted out. But when you watch him on tape, the amount of times that Tua was trying to move him with his eyes in zone coverage, and Teron Johnson just prioritized getting depth, prioritized sticking in his zone, and made it so difficult for Tua and made him take checkdowns so many times. There was a play where they have a slant flat with a slant by Waddle and a flat to Berrios, and Tua pumps to the flat to try to get him moving to Berrios, and Teron Johnson is just sitting there in zone coverage, and he doesn't move a muscle. And Tua was forced to go to Berrios on the outside. It only picked up a couple of yards. It felt like that was the way that Teron Johnson was playing the whole day. So, yeah, that is my unsung hero. And up next, we have a funny award. We're naming it the Kenny Stills Award because it's basically who dropped the ball this game, which player on either team was the reason for a loss or just was not playing up to standard. And my Kenny Stills Award for who dropped the ball, I feel like you're going to guess this and it's going to be pretty obvious. I feel like we both have the same player, so I'm just going to guess yours straight up. I'm going with Liam Eichenberg. Is that your player?
Yeah, it is. It is. I won't lie. It is.
Yeah, it's mine too. It's kind of obvious. I mean, I feel like we're both going to answer it. I feel like a little side note would probably be Justin Bethel, just because he had honestly, after we hyped him up a lot, he had a really poor game in coverage. Like I said, they made him that nickel defender so often, the Bills just kept going after him when they weren't going after Cater Kohu, who I guess would be another option for this award. But yeah.
And what's his name? Sorry. And Brandon Jones. Like those three guys on the defense, they just attacked that side of the field every play, it felt like.
Yeah, there were just so many poor performances on defense. But if you want to announce this last award and try to take a guess, this one is a little bit different.
Yeah, so this is the FinsFocus turning point. This is just the turning point in the game. So I know what mine is. If I had to pick Tyler's, because I would go with the 2 interception, but that was just a little too late before the game really turned. I'm going to say it's when they got the first stop, like we were talking about before, where it's like the first team to get a stop is who wins this game. So I'm going to guess that's what yours was.
Okay, mine was a little bit later than that.
Okay.
It's 28-14. Miami's in a third down situation. I believe it's 3rd and 1 or 3rd and 2. And usually these are the kind of looks where Miami puts the ball in the hands of Tua and just kind of says I mean, he's one of the best like ball handling quarterbacks in the league. You say, hey, go try to draw him with like an RPO action, go throw something over the middle, like go make a play. And Tua's usually really good in those short yardage situations. But instead on this play, they ran an outside toss to Raheem Mostert that got absolutely blown up. Mostert fumbles the ball, and then Buffalo scores again before the half, and then all of a sudden it's 31-14 instead of potentially 28-21 or 28-17. It just made the lead that much more unbearable, right, going in, like, right as the end of the half was coming. So that's mine. As for yours, I'm going to go with the Stephon Diggs broken tackle touchdown.
That was close, and this one is definitely the hardest one to guess because it could literally be any moment, especially in a game like this. For me, it was just Mike McDaniel not doing anything at the end of the half just because I thought that was the turning point. And when I realized, I was like, oh my God, he's overthinking and getting completely outcoached and outclassed by Sean McDermott. So those were our 5 awards. We'll continue to do this for the rest of the reviews. We have Giants week coming up. We'll preview that Thursday or Friday, and we'll be back with that. A little bit of announcement, which I completely forgot to say, and I should have said at the beginning of the episode if you're watching on YouTube. We are on Spotify now. It will be in the description, so make sure you check that out. And if you're listening on Spotify, we also have a YouTube channel, so make sure you support on both ends. Leave 5 stars, subscribe, follow, all that type of stuff. Follow us on Twitter, follow the show on Twitter, do all that stuff. Thank you so much for listening. And yeah, that's a tough game.